Minecraft, the game that once could be run on a potato or a toaster toasting that potato, but now it's seen as one of the more intensive games you can run. It can still be run on some lower end hardware, albeit poorly, though even on better hardware the performance sucks ass. I find that the newer versions of Minecraft can actually run worse than GTA 5, for a game that already had simplistic visuals back when it was becoming a thing in 2009, that's not very good. So I measured Minecraft performance from versions 1.8, 1.12, 1.16, 1.19 and 1.20, and the results are interesting to say the least. So what are the results of my tests? Take a look at this table. The newer versions actually get higher FPS, and the 1.20 even gets over 1000 frames per second. So what's the deal? There's clearly been improvements in rendering, but while moving even just a mouse, not even walking around and loading chunks, the number drops almost 2 times. In actual gameplay, instead of seeing those 1000 FPS, you're instead more likely to see somewhere around 400 to 300 FPS, especially if you have any kind of large farms or animals. And remember, I'm running the game on an RTX card. And that's not to mention the actual issue, the thing that matters the most, frame times. Here you can see that exact thing in the latest version. Look at the graph here. You can see a bunch of vertical lines. Ideally they should stay below this horizontal line, and whenever they spike is when you begin to experience lag. You can also see these lines in the TPS graph, but we'll leave that for later. Taking a closer look at the results of 1.8 and 1.12 run perfectly fine, and even 1.16 also runs quite smooth, with little to no issues. However, as soon as we start to go to 1.18 and above, we start to see these frame time issues. And it doesn't help that you really would want to have a higher render distance because of the much higher elevation changes in the caves and cliffs update. So why does this happen? The updates obviously, but more specifically the height changes that now go from negative 64 to 320. Compare that to the old limits of 0 to 256. The game now has to load much more data when it wasn't ever really meant to. With so many expensive updates and very little performance improvements, this will only get worse. So why doesn't Mojang just dedicate an update to making the game run better? This may be a bit of an assumption, but the reason is most likely because it's not profitable. The average player doesn't care too much about the game's FPS as long as it runs, and the average player probably has hardware that's good enough to run the game at least 60 FPS. So Mojang would much rather focus on adding new things into the game, like chat reporting, instead of making an update that to a large portion of players would seem lacking, since not much was added. This is especially bad on servers, where the issues are much more pronounced. Some of the older versions can easily handle anywhere from 200 to even 300 players. Now you'll be lucky to get 80 to 100 players with no issues. So what can you do? Mods obviously. Some that I could recommend would be Lithium, Sodium, Lazy DFU, and of course you cannot go wrong with Optifine. As for servers, the best you can do is use something like Paper and pre-generate the world. You can go a lot more in depth, but that's a whole nother video in and of itself. Anyways, that's all I have for now, bye.